Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we are going to discuss important issues appearing in the Hindu newspaper of New Delhi edition dated 17 January 2018. Let's begin. On page number 1, we see these news: government to revisit Malimath Committee report. And there is another news: HUD subsidies to be phased out as said by Naweed. So, let's see these two news individually as appearing on page number 1. Now this news on page number 1 about government to revisit Malimath Committee report also appears as a continuation on page number 12. So let us understand about this Malimath report and what important suggestions it made when it was constituted. The Malimath Committee was formed by the then Home Minister of India, Shri L.K. Advani, in the year 2000 to revisit the criminal justice system. It was headed by Justice V.S. Malimath and it submitted its report in the year 2003 or in March 2003. The committee suggested that there was a need for reform. Why? Because the system devised by the British was more than a century old and thereby had become ineffective and redundant. Moreover, various amendments was required in different criminal laws of the country. For example, the Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedure Code, as well as the Evidence Act. So, the committee suggested certain amendments under these Indian Penal Code, CRPC, as well as Evidence Act, so as to facilitate the criminal justice system and also to reorder the entire judicial system in the country. It further said that the existing criminal laws has become redundant and has failed to deter the criminals, which can be seen in a rise in the crime rate. Thus, the committee considered that various reforms in the entire criminal justice system were required so as to address the issue in a more proactive manner. So let us understand few of the important suggestions which were made by the Malimath Committee and what those suggestions were about. The committee suggested that the current model of the justice system which we follow, that is the adversarial system, should be converted, or certain important features of this inquisitorial system should be incorporated into the current adversarial system. I'm sure you must be confused what is this adversarial system or inquisitorial system. It's very simple. Let us understand. In our adversarial system, which is followed by India, here the investigation is carried out by the police officer. After the police has completed his investigation, he submits the investigation report or the charge sheet to the judge who would be hearing a particular case. Now, this judge will hear out arguments both by the prosecution as well as by the defense. You must have heard the word defense lawyer in any movie. So as to understand, suppose a person has been accused of, say, a murder. So he will be, when he hire a lawyer, he will be defending that person and he will be known as the defense lawyer. Whereas prosecution or the state will be presenting certain witnesses against this particular person, and here this lawyer hired by the state or the government would be the lawyer of the prosecution. Thus, in this system, investigation report submitted by the police officer is argued thoroughly in a trial, in a court, where both these prosecution as well as defense or prosecution lawyer as well as defense lawyer present their respective arguments to a neutral judge who has no prior information about the case. Thus, in this system, the judge decides on the basis of arguments proposed both by the prosecution as well as by the defense. And thereafter, the judge gives a reasoned order. It means the judgment given by the judge has to state its reasons or why it has given the order. Thus, the concept of arbitrariness or partiality is removed in this particular process because of this concept of reasoned order. Now let us understand what happens in the inquisitorial system. In this, the judicial magistrate or the judge, they participate in the investigation. Thereby, they cannot be said to be a neutral judge. In this case, the presiding judge supervises the gathering of evidence necessary to resolve the particular case, and the attorney or the defense lawyer merely plays a passive role, thereby suggesting routes of inquiry for the presiding judge. Thus, in this system, the judge concerned is not actively involved in the investigation or the inquiry, which is primarily done by the police officer. Whereas in the inquisitorial system, the judge is very much a part of the investigation process. Thus, the neutrality of the judge can be questioned in certain cases. In the adversarial system, or as followed by India, the accused is presumed to be innocent unless proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt or unless proven guilty in a trial, where in this process where it was argued both by the prosecution and the defense. Thus, in our system, the accused has to be proven guilty by the prosecution. And in this, whereas in this case, since the judge also is a part of the investigation process, thus hence the accused is not considered innocent. And his defense lawyer or the attorney has to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the person involved or the person accused in any crime is not guilty. Thus, this is the basic difference between an adversarial as well as inquisitorial system. So, this Malimath Committee has suggested that the judicial magistrates or the judges shall also get powers of investigation and inquiry in a trial. This would be a significant move if the government accepts this particular recommendation, as it will involve changes in the Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedure Code, as well as the Indian Evidence Act. This will be a major reform. Let us understand what are the other important measures suggested by this Malimath Committee report. Now it talks about Article 20 Clause 3, which is also a fundamental right. It says that no person accused of any offence shall be compelled to be a witness against himself. Thus, this fundamental right talks about that no person accused of an offence shall be compelled to be a witness against himself or herself. In this respect, the committee has suggested that the accused concerned shall file a statement to the prosecution or the government concerned, disclosing their stand. This will effectively violate Article 20 Clause 3. So as to incorporate this particular suggestion, a certain amendment needs to be required in Article 20 Clause 3, which is also a fundamental right. And this amendment will not be that easy because it forms a part of fundamental rights and is one of the basic human rights guaranteed to a person facing a trial. Thus, it will be interesting to see how the government agreed to this particular suggestion. The committee is also of the view that when a person is accused, till the moment he is proven guilty or not guilty, a lot of time is wasted in the entire due process of law. So, it has suggested certain drastic measures to change the entire criminal jurisprudence as has been followed in India for so long. Let us see what are those basic changes are. Now, as per the Indian laws, police get a period of 90 days to file their charge sheet or investigation report. The committee has suggested to double this day, that is, time given to police for filing investigating report to 180 days. In another stand, a person accused of grave offences can be locked for 15 days under police remand. In this, the committee has suggested to double this day, that is, increase the period to 30 days for this police remand. This might increase the concept of police torture, also leading to custodial deaths. As of now, confession made during police remand to any police officer is non-admissible or cannot be admitted as evidence in a court of law. However, the committee has suggested to make amendment to section 25 of the Indian Evidence Act so as to make confession to police officer as admissible as an evidence. Currently, you must remember that any confession made to a police officer is not admissible as of now, but the committee has recommended to make this admissible. In this respect, we should also understand the committee has also recommended to make character of an accused as an admissible evidence. Further, the committee has also recommended to remove distinction between cognizable as well as non-cognizable offence. As we know that cognizable offence are such offence in which a police officer can arrest without warrant. All these suggestions made by the Malimath Committee are drastic suggestions. However, the government has again decided to revisit this Malimath Committee report. Let's see what does the government comes up with. Now, this topic was discussed in length because this topic forms a part of security, which is a part of UPSC syllabus, as well as it's a part of governance and judicial as well as police reforms. After going through this, you must have understand that there is a nexus between judiciary as well as police, because in any case, it is the police who submits an investigation report to the judicial magistrate or to the judge. Thus, this nexus becomes important to understand not only from governance point of view but also from certain basic human rights as rights of an accused or rights of those person undergoing trial. Thus, this also becomes a part of rights issue. Thus, this topic is very important. Now, from a prelims perspective, various statement-based questions can be asked about Malimath Committee since the government has decided to revisit the report of this particular committee. You should be knowing about certain important recommendations which this committee gave. For example, the difference between cognizable and non-cognizable offense should be done away with. Like the confession made to a police officer, you should be knowing that as of now, the confession made to a police officer is not admissible as an evidence in a court of law. Then you should be knowing that what are the important changes suggested by this committee with respect to filing of investigation report and with respect to this important fundamental rights about right of an accused with respect to making him compelled to be a witness against himself. Thus, these are important points as basic statement-based questions can be asked in prelims examination. And again, a very important difference between adversarial system and inquisitorial system. As of now, this inquisitorial system is currently being followed in France, Germany, and some other European countries. So, this topic again becomes very important both from prelims point of view as well as from mains point of view. Now, let's move on to the next news. Now, this news on page number 1 about HUD subsidies to be phased out as said by Naweed. This news also appears as a continuation on page number 12. Now, this very same news also finds a mention on page number 7 as well as 13 in the Indian Express newspaper. So let's see this news with respect to our UPSC syllabus. So primarily what this is news about? This news is about the decision of the government to withdraw HUD subsidy in coming years. Now, why was this decision taken by the government? It has two aspects. First, there was a Supreme Court order of the year 2012 which said to reduce subsidy progressively so as to completely eliminate it within 10 years. Thus, Supreme Court in its judgment effectively ordered the government to withdraw the entire HUD subsidy by the year 2022 May. The government has acted very much on the directions of the Supreme Court order of the year 2012. The government has further said that the money saved by withdrawal of HUD subsidy shall be further utilized for education and other social development of the minority community, focusing mainly on the education of girl child. There was also a recommendation of withdrawal of HUD subsidy by Afzal Amanullah Committee. The Afzal Amanullah Committee in one of the recommendations also talked about removal of HUD subsidy. Another recommendation of Afzal Amanullah Committee was that women above 45 years of age could go to Hajj in a group of 4 or more without a male guardian. Thus, the government has also accepted this particular recommendation of the Afzal Amanullah Committee. In this respect, let us understand another important thing. Indian nationals perform Hajj through two streams. First, the Hajj Committee of India, and second, registered private tour operators. It is important to know that the Hajj Committee of India has been established under the Hajj Committee Act 2002. Thus, the Hajj Committee Act 2002 establishes the Hajj Committee of India as well as various state Hajj committees. And this Hajj Committee of India is headquartered at Mumbai. Thus, simple preliminary questions can be asked with respect to the headquarter of Hajj Committee of India, since it is very much in news, with respect to Afzal Amanullah Committee and their recommendations on removal of Hajj subsidy, as well as its recommendation of to allow women who are above 45 years of age to go in a group of 4 or more without a male guardian. Thus, this topic becomes important from a prelims point of view, as statement-based prelims question can be asked with respect to the Hajj subsidy, with respect to Afzal Amanullah Committee, as well as with respect to the Hajj Committee of India and its headquarters. Now let's move on to the next news. On page number 2, you find this news, leaders and followers. Now, this news specifically talk about leadership skills and organizational development. Although this talks about corporate sector, but I'm sure you can learn many things which can be benefited for your own cause, not only in your service, but also in your day-to-day life. This news talks about effective leadership, where a leader not only takes care of the administrative need of the organization but simultaneously also follows the personal needs of its subordinates or its fellow beings. Thus, in any effective leadership, these two has to be balanced. Now, please go through this news by yourself as you can learn quite a lot of things by going through these simple news. This news can be used in your ethics paper as well as this news can be used as a case study or incorporated as a case study in your ethics paper. Just go through this news very simply. Now let's move on to the next news. Now we move to page number 7. Here the news reads, missing the grass for trees in Western Ghats. Now this news talks about reduction of natural grasslands or sholas into this area of Palani Hills. Now the reasons given for the reduction of natural grasslands are increasing area of timber plantation, expanding agriculture, and spread of invasive species. So these three becomes one of the prime reason of reduction of natural grassland. This may be very simply asked in a prelim question. Three statements may be given or a question can be asked what can be the following reasons for reduction of natural grasslands? Timber plantation, expanding agriculture, spread of invasive species. So all these this is how a prelims question can be framed from this particular topic. Now let us understand one simple fact about this Palni Hills. We find this Palni Hill in the states of Kerala as well as Tamil Nadu, and they are an eastward extension, as you can see here, of the Western Ghats and run parallel to the western coast. Thus, a simple question regarding Palini Hills can also be asked in prelims examination. It can be asked with respect to the states, that would be Kerala as well as Tamil Nadu, and it can be asked whether they are a part of Western Ghats or Eastern Ghats. So the answer would be they are a part of Western Ghats. See, this is how we understand or break a news from prelims point of view, and this is how questions also are framed by UPSC. Let's move on to this particular news. What does this news particularly say? This news effectively talks about reduction of grassland or sholas in that particular area surrounding the Palini Hills. Let us see a particular statistics. Now in this statistics, we see about shola, agriculture and fallow land, and timber. Remember the three reasons why the grasslands were decreasing. The primary was timber. Here the growth is 1093% in timber, and we can see simultaneously the reduction in the area since 1973 to 2004. Then it was approx 374 square kilometer. Now it has come down to 124.5 square kilometer. So there is a roughly 66.7% decline in the entire grassland. Now this is important to understand, because reduction in grasslands also reduces the capacity of different flora and fauna to thrive in such grasslands. And also one of the reason was agriculture or increase of agriculture. We see that since those times, increase or spread of agriculture in the area of grassland is 3 times. This shows us that why this shola grasslands has been constantly decreasing. And another reason given was spread of invasive species such as Acacia. Now because of this invasive species, it is pushing back the growth of endemic species. So what are endemic species? Thus endemic species are those flora and fauna which exist only in a particular geographical location. For example, any flora or fauna which exists only in such shola grasslands of the Palini Hills. In this news, the endemic species Nilgiri pipit may be under threat because of increase of invasive species. Thus we see and understand that relation between invasive species and endemic species is very much indirectly proportional. Or in other words, more invasive species will grow in a particular area, it will lead to reduction in the endemic species of that particular area. Thus, this topic become important basically from prelims point of view, as we have seen various questions which may be asked in the prelims examination. Now let's move on to the next news. Now we move to page number 9. Here the news reads, 36% rural youth can't name India's capital, finds a survey. Now this survey has been, as you can read in the newspaper, carried out by Annual Status of Education Report or ASER. This survey is carried out by the NGO named as Pratham, and this ASER survey basically surveys youth from an age group of 14 to 18 years of age. Rest you can read in this newspaper, and it's all about statistics about how or what percentage of youth, both including boys as well as girls, whether they can do certain basic calculation or whether they can point out certain areas in a map, or with respect to, as you here you can see, financial participation, youth who can do basic mathematics, who can do financial calculation, and who can do daily task. And daily task includes counting money, add weights, can tell time. So this is basically a very comprehensive review or comprehensive survey by this ASER team, and it shows how the youths in our country perform not only through education but also in performing their day-to-day lives. So just go through this particular news. As you can understand, the impact of both education as well as financial inclusion in India as carried out by government through various schemes. These statistics may be important in answering various questions pertaining to social issues, not only with respect to financial inclusion but also with respect to the status of education in our country. Or there are questions which are asked with respect to recommendations or suggestions so as to how to improve not only the education system in the country but also to develop the concept of financial inclusion. This topic generally becomes an important topic. However, in this particular news, there are various statistics provided which you can go by yourself. Now we move on to the next news. Now we move on to page number 10. This editorial is about Jallikattu. As we have seen in the previous DNS that the issue of Jallikattu has been referred by the Chief Justice of India to a constitution bench with reference to conservation of culture as a fundamental right under Article 29 Clause 1. So in this news, it is important to understand about Prevention of Cruelty Act 1960 as it talks about pain and suffering of animals. Another important issue which pertains to this particular news is with respect to Animal Welfare Board of India, because it is only as per the Animal Welfare Board of India's discretion that performing animals can be allowed. However, with respect to the Supreme Court 2014 judgment which banned the Jallikattu event was eventually overcome by a legislation of the Tamil Nadu government, which effectively overcame through legislation this Supreme Court judgment. All these issues have been covered in the January edition of Focus magazine. For further reference, you can always refer to the January edition of Focus magazine. Thus, the important point to understand in this issue is, as you know that a person died in the celebration of Jallikattu. Thus, this topic becomes very important. Let us wait and watch what the Constitution Bench, which is about to hear the issue of Jallikattu as a preservation of culture, will say in its judgment. Until then, let us understand that this issue has been dealt under the Prevention of Cruelty Act 1960 with respect to pain and suffering of animals, and also with respect to the Animal Welfare Board of India. Now we move on to the next news. On page number 10, there is another news with respect to bonds. It says face the inevitable. Here the news says sharp rise in bond yields has resulted in losses of banks. So let us understand this entire context of bond yields with respect to how banks are suffering losses because of this. First and foremost, to understand a very basic financial concept is that yield of bonds is always inversely proportional to its price. In other words, there is an inverse relation between the price of the bond and yield of the bond. So if the yield of the bond increases, then price of such bond decreases. Now let us understand how this affects our entire banking system and how it has also affected the concept of fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit is total expenditure of the government minus total receipt of the government, and it does not include loans or borrowings. We all know that this year the government may exceed its limit of fiscal deficit. So in anticipation of such increase of fiscal deficit, market has seen a sudden rise in the yield of bonds. So as mentioned earlier in our basic premises, that when yield of bonds increases, then the price of bond decreases. Thus, taking this basic parameter, let us understand this. So very simply, if the government is not able to meet its fiscal deficit requirement, it will obviously take loans from the market, and this loan will be raised through issue bonds in the market. Now, the market will be flushed with such bonds, or in other words, there would be excessive supply of bonds in the market. And as we know, due to excessive supply of bond, its price will decrease. And as we have seen earlier, this decrease in price of the bond will lead to increase in its yield or increase in its return. Now let us understand this very simple concept through a balance sheet. In the balance sheet, the government bonds are considered as an asset of the government, and we see that the price of the bonds are decreasing in the market, and such decrease in value of the assets is affecting the entire balance sheet. This is the exact problem which is faced by the banks currently due to the decrease in price of bonds, and this decrease in price of bonds due to market fluctuations or fluctuations by the market is also known as market to market losses or M2M. Thus the banks have asked the RBI to allow them to spread these losses over a longer period of time. As we know that the problem of non-performing asset has already crippled the balance sheet of our banks, and again this problem of bond is further deteriorating the balance sheet. Thus the banks have asked the RBI for a write-off or to spread these losses over a longer period of time so that they can overcome the losses suffered by the crash in prices of the bonds. However, the RBI has said that the banks already knew about these market fluctuations and should have been well prepared in advance, and has further said that RBI cannot manage risk posed by interest rate fluctuations of the bonds, as is the responsibility of the banks to hedge themselves against such future risk. Thus, RBI as of now has refused to provide any cover to the banks, resulting in losses due to crash in the price of bonds. Thus, this statement by the RBI, where it has said it will not directly help the bank to cover their losses because of crash in bond price, highlights the importance of RBI in maintaining the financial stability of the country. It has also suggested that the banks should themselves take care of their investment losses instead of adopting temporary measures. This topic becomes very important both from prelims as well as from mains point of view. From prelims, since the issue of government bond yields is so much is news, any question can be expected either with respect to its relation between price and yield or how it affects the balance sheet of a particular bank. Also, with respect to the prelims, the concept of fiscal deficit becomes very important. And when we mention fiscal deficit, it goes without saying that the concept of primary deficit always comes into mind. Primary deficit is equal to fiscal deficit minus interest payment. Thus, all these topics becomes important from prelims point of view. Whereas from a mains point of view, problems faced by banks, what are the possible solutions or suggestions so that the problems can be overcome. So, these becomes important topic for your exam point of view. Let's move on to the next news. Now we move to page number 15. Here the news reads, Center to seek comments on Farm Export Policy Draft. Here the Commerce Ministry or the Ministry of Commerce will soon put out a draft agricultural export policy where it will focus on the following issues, namely boost shipments of farm items by identifying niche products and new markets, reduction of agricultural wastage through pre as well as post harvest interventions, and also to create agricultural clusters. Draft policy will cover some of the important items as mentioned here. We'll wait and watch for the government to finally upload the agricultural draft policy. With this, we come to an end to today's newspaper. Let's move on to the question for the day.